So this is why Peter reminds us and tells us, I want you to be like-minded. I want you to practice unity instead of uniformity. This like-mindedness is reflected on how you need to stop being, again, making choices that move you away from being sympathetic. This is the understanding when we think about sympathy. This is the understanding that, once again, being like-minded, for some of us, what we need to be united is something beyond just doctrine. And again, as Christians, yes, we're united by doctrine, we're united by Jesus, we're united, but apparently 2,000 years ago, part of the unity that was happening in the life of these people was exactly the trials, the tribulation, was exactly that they were running for their lives together. My question for us today, as we continue to navigate a difficult stage of life, as we go through the fragmentation of society, as we see the polarization of culture, especially in the world of politics, I mean, from every angle that you see trials and struggles, our question is this situation testing the unity or the uniformity of our lives? Meaning, see, when you think about sympathy, because that's what he's called us to be. He's calling us to be like-minded, and he's calling us to be or to have sympathy for one another, is the understanding that when you have unity and when you have like-mindedness and when you have sympathy, I want you to hear this closely. Quitting is not an option. We don't quit in one another. We don't quit in the family. We don't quit in the family of God. We don't quit in life. And this is why what you see in here is that apparently for the church that was united, that was celebrating like-mindedness, is not the absence of trials. It's just that trials now spells out the word together. We do this together. So I want you to dream with me as you think about what is happening in our culture today, as you see, again, the challenges that we're facing, and they are real, they are tangible, and many of them are irreversible. Are we doing it together? The opposite of togetherness, I will argue that is not disunity. I think it's uniformity. The opposite of togetherness is that I'm willing to stay only if you do X, Y, and Z. See, it is a very challenging stage because we're seeing people not only dying from COVID-19 and many other illnesses, but you know what the most tragic things are happening, and it's difficult to do this. And I'm saying this because I'm coming from the background where a couple of months ago, my mother died. And one of the privileges that I had, that many of us had, with our relatives, especially for me, with my mom, is that we were there as she went to be with Christ. Many of our patients today, many of the families dying, as I speak to you even today, they're dying alone because no one can be with them physically as they die. So all that I'm asking you, I want you to think for a second as we think about the trials and the tribulations that we're facing, as Peter is speaking to the church 2,000 years ago, is that we must see trials as the stage for us to bring togetherness, for us to experience this in the unity that Jesus modeled with the Father, that Jesus modeled with the Spirit, and this triune God. I want you to listen to this again. That unity has been given to us, so we do not have to figure out neither to formulate what unity looks like. Look at Jesus, how he related to the Father. Look at Jesus, how the Spirit submits to the Son, and that is what we call unity. In that context, Peter, once again, reminds the church and says, I want you to not only be sympathetic, I want you not only to be like-minded, but I want you to, in the context of trials, in the context of diversity, in the context of brokenness, I want you to love one another. This is the challenge today because, as you know, when it comes to love, I mean, this is such a commercial, watered down phrase and understanding. And I'm saying this because this past Saturday, tragically, I had the privilege, but it was a tragic privilege, to participate in what I will consider our first COVID-19 funeral within the life of the church. A family member of one of our members tragically went to be with Christ because of COVID-19. And one of the distinctiveness about funerals, which, by the way, recently I also had the privilege to do a wedding. So weddings, funerals, anything that has to do with coming together, when you see people coming together for a wedding, for a funeral, for any other thing, I mean, you think about birthdays, everything has changed, as we know, right? So here's the thing. When it came to that funeral services today, they look different. And part of the difference in funeral services, because we're talking about this concept of loving one another, in my mind, I couldn't help, but I'm participating. I'm a part of this, a celebration of a life, because it's a beautiful legacy that this brother leaves behind with the family, and yet it is also the mourning, the sadness of the temporary departure of the brother. I want you to think about who were there at the funeral service. And those who were at the funeral service is what we call the NOK, the knock, which is the next of kin. This is what we typically filled out on an application when you get into an airplane and you get into a flight and you need to fill out a personal application, and you talk about who's your closest, nearest relative. Those are the people that were in the funeral home, the closest, the children, the grandkids, the closest to the person that was dying. The same principle applies many times, and it did to the wedding that we recently did. You look at the people that I attended, especially with the restrictions and the regulations that we have from our government that we must follow on gathering together. I'm telling you, the people that will be present in moments like this are the closest. I believe this is exactly the language that Peter is using when he says you must love one another. When you look at the family of God, when you look at your marriage, when you look at the relationships, we need to approach this conversation from understanding that as a church, when it comes to the trials that we're facing, we do this in the context of NOK. We tried each other. We deal with each other, and we look at each other in a manner that we are the closest to one another.